Good morning. Welcome to the 55th annual meeting of the Southeastern Conference of the United Church of Christ. My name is Rhoda Vanderhart, and I am a member of Open Table United Church of Christ here in Mobile, Alabama. And today you are in a session called The Great Unveiling, and we're going to hear from Reverend Cameron Trimble. Reverend Trimble is the CEO of Convergence, and she's been doing this work for 20 years. If you haven't ever heard Cameron speak, you're in for a real treat today. She is not with us in person, but has shared with us a recording. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and we'll hear from her.
My name is Cameron Trimble, and I am the CEO of an organization called Convergence. And I'm really grateful that I'm going to get to spend a few minutes with you talking about this super weird time we are living through, and a time I've started to call the Great Unveiling, and what its implications might mean for us as faith leaders, trying to find our way, discern our way, faithfully follow the movement of the Spirit. In a moment in human history when it seems like everything is a little undependable, a little beyond our comprehension, a little unpredictable in its nature. So let's dig in. So part of the interesting reality of this moment for me is I am, in addition to being a pastor in the United Church of Christ, I am also a pilot. And aviation has been an incredible teacher for me, particularly when it comes to situations that might catch me off guard or catch me in a place of disorientation. In fact, that's the key to the early lessons that any good aviation instructor or school teaches early students in piloting, is how to maintain situational awareness, how to react in times of great disorientation or great emergency, even in when a great deal is at stake. And it kind of feels like this is one of those times. And I found my aviation training coming back to me in some kind of weird ways. So I want to walk you through kind of a lesson, actually, an approach that one of my great instructors, a guy named Todd Shelnut, did with me as a way of kind of fine-tuning our eyes to see this moment of in human history and understanding kind of what's going on here. Now, normally you would think when you're going to learn to fly an airplane that you would do a great deal of ground school, and you would study the mechanics of flight and the mechanics of the airplane, and then you might think that you would go get in the airplane and go fly. Actually, the way that it generally works is they skip the ground school and they just put you in a plane. It's shocking. But my instructor wanted to begin my training early by teaching me to develop a certain intuition that he understood to be a key to being a safe pilot. Because, of course, the challenge of piloting is that if anything goes wrong, oftentimes it is pilot error that creates the crisis of the moment. Sometimes it's mechanical, but oftentimes it's just that we missed an indicator on our cockpit control panel, or we failed to pay attention to our stall speed, or we weren't looking outside of our windows and we didn't see the oncoming traffic that was headed our way. And so we set ourselves up for a dangerous collision. So there's something about the eyes to see and the ears to hear. You might remember that as a scripture. But there's something essential about that as tools for navigating times of uncertainty, times where being alert really matters. And so there's an intuition, a practice to it. Now, to get me started in this, he taught me by using pieces of art. And so I want to show you some of these pieces and ask you, what do you see? So I've put a picture up here. This picture was taken around the time of World War II. It was taken by a soldier. What images come to mind? So you could maybe take a minute and if you're seeing this on Zoom, you can put your responses in the chat, or maybe just if you're watching this on your own, you can just jot down, or just, what is this that you see here? Well, let me show you. Oftentimes I get people will say responses like they see clouds, they see street patterns. You might see that down in the bottom left corner. I've seen, or some people have said, well, actually, I get all kinds of crazy, bizarre answers. But the right answer, which I'll put in relief on your screen here, is it's a cow. It's a picture of a cow that is put in starker relief so that you can see it, and then outlined in red, of course. And so now if I toggle back and show you the original picture, there's no way you could not see the cow, right? It's like glaringly obvious that this is a picture of a cow. But I intentionally did something in setting this picture up in your mind that was intentional in misleading you, to train you to make an assumption that this might have been anything but a cow, right? So I began by talking about my flight instructor in my history of flying. And so I've got aviation in your mind, and I've got altitude, and you're thinking maybe this is a picture taken from the air. So I've created inference, context for you that you use to draw to make some certain assumptions about what you're looking at. Then when I told you what this picture, or when this picture was taken and by whom, of course I referenced World War II. So for some of you that might trigger, hey, this must be a picture from the war and from like an airplane flying over some community, or this, I said it was taken by a soldier. I didn't tell you, a soldier on the ground, so I didn't give you context. So I intentionally gave you just enough information that you could draw some inferences that if you hadn't already seen this image before, or if you weren't able to see it kind of clear-eyed, absent that narrative, you might have seen things here that weren't here. It's a cow, right? Now, let me show you a different picture. This is a picture by a wonderful Japanese artist, a woman named Yumasaki, who in 2013 created this piece. Now, there's something about perspective here that my instructor Todd was trying to teach me in showing me this image. And you would never guess, but this beautiful picture of this little girl is actually constructed by using a single piece of black thread woven between a bunch of different brads that are tapped into a piece of plywood, essentially. And so she's woven this together to create this image. But at the scale at which I'm showing it to you, that level of detail is not necessarily obvious, right? So my telling you that, you begin to see the dots and you begin to understand what they are. But at the scale of, let's say, 30,000 feet, we can see the ways in which all of the brads and the string is in relationship with each other. And we see this glorious, beautiful picture that's before us. But here's the thing. If I had showed you this picture first, and if I had not said anything about, now we're going to look at a picture of a young woman, and I showed you this and ask you what this was, you probably would not have been able to guess that this was, the eye and the eyebrow and the beginning of the hairline of a portrait. You would begin to see these dots and these lines connecting the dots, but even at this scale, it's hard to tell what that is actually. Now, if I showed you this picture, you might have been able to see, okay, well, it looks like brads or some sort of almost diamond-looking things that are, it seems, holding the intersections of what might be black yarn or black string here. But we would never have any sense, of course, of the totality of the piece of work because we've now zoomed in at, let's say, 2,000 feet, right? Now, the 30,000 foot perspective or image that we saw right here is, of course, it exists the whole time, but depending on what access I would want to grant to you in your viewing, that determines what you're able to see and what set of assumptions that you hold as you're looking at that, whatever image it is that I'm showing you, right? So altitude matters, perspective matters, because things have always been in relationship and are continue to be in relationship, but they get revealed to us, unveiled to us, depending upon the altitude at which we are viewing them. One of the things I think has happened with COVID and with this global pandemic is that the stress that it placed upon our culture revealed to us, unveiled the already broken and fractured and breaking and fracturing places in our society that were already in relationship, already under duress, already, as systems do, producing what they were designed to produce, and already in crisis. But this accelerated or exacerbated the deconstruction or the breaking apart or the harming, actually, of a lot of our systems that have been in existence. It also did some really great things, too. It has also accelerated our understanding of our interdependence, and it has, for many of us, reconnected us to our rooted us in place, and connected us back into nature and reconnected us with local community. For some of us, it has slowed our patterns down sufficiently that it's almost as if we've been invited into this intentional monasticism, in our solitude, in our homes. There's really been beautiful things that have been unveiled, but there's also been places of brokenness that have been unveiled. And it's hard to see, it's hard to discern unless you play at different altitudes and you become curious about what is acting on what and what is being revealed when you put other things in relationship and become develop the eyes to see and the ears to hear what has been true all along, but is now more easily accessible to us. In this video, what I want you to do is pay attention, if you will, to the people in the white shirts. And in this video, this was done by Daniel Simons, who you can see on your screen, who was a psychologist, and he was trying to study perception and the ways in which our attention gets drawn towards certain things. Now, the exercise here that I'd like to ask of you is there's these two balls, and these balls are going to get passed between these different teams. I'd like you to stay focused on how many times the ball gets passed between the women in the white shirts. So it can bounce and then get caught, and that's just one pass. So they might pass directly to each other, or they might bounce the ball and it gets the next person catches it. That counts as one. But let's see how many times you can count here. All right, very good. So now my question to you, of course, is how many times was that ball passed? If you guessed 16, you're right. My next question to you is, did you see the ginormous gorilla that walked right through the middle of that video? If you did, congratulations. The first time I saw this, I did not see the gorilla. I was so focused on following the white shirts that I missed this huge gorilla person dressed in a black gorilla outfit walk through the middle of it and bang his chest and then walk off on the other screen. So let me show this to you one more time and see if you can now see the gorilla. There he is. So crazy, isn't it? So now, of course, you'll always see the gorilla if you see this video in future context. So interesting that when we tell ourselves, hey, pay attention to the people in the white shirts, that our visual sight actually tunes out anyone who's not in that white shirt, right? So that's a natural blind spot. That's just part of what it means to be human. But when we're living in times of disorientation, one of the first steps, I think, in beginning to find ourselves again, beginning to sense what is before us, the context that is being revealed, is to begin to question what are the assumptions that I have carried thus far that have probably served me very well to get to this point today, but that are blinding me or holding me back from seeing what is being revealed to me about the world that I live in now, right? So questioning the assumptions as the starting place for reorientation. So maybe learning in that example to track the white people in the white shirts to fulfill the mission, if you will, the assignment, but to tune in also to what are the additional movements that are happening on screen to see if we can broaden our peripheral vision so that we could catch this ginormous gorilla walking across, right? So the question now is, what is being revealed in this interesting time of being a human being on this planet? What are we learning? Well, we're living through some real shockwaves, aren't we? If we go back to maybe 2008, we've been living through we've seen a financial meltdown. We have seen the climate breakdown. We have experienced now the COVID lockdown, the racial throwdown, and then I would add to this the Christian letdown. We are now living in an age where Gallup, in a poll that was released in April of 2021, stated what I think most of us already knew, that for the first time in Gallup's polling history, there are more Americans who are claiming no official religious affiliation, institutional religious affiliation, than there are who claim that they do go to a traditional religious institution for their spiritual fulfillment. Now that's balanced with that there's also an incredibly high percentage of Americans who still report being curious spiritual seekers. It's just that they no longer turn to the institutional church as a viable platform or pathway by which to engage in their own personal exploration. Now, I think, and I suspect you, if you're part of the UCC, you might agree, that that is likely in large part because we have so profoundly damaged the brand. When white nationalism joined up with Christianity in the form of the evangelical right, we sacrificed something deeply sacred and violated the trust of the brand that is called Christianity. And the big question before us is that irrevocably broken, or can it in fact be redeemed? So we've lived through this time of great tumult, great challenge of a lot of undoing, so that it reveals then great possibility for what is to come. I say that because I have this sense, actually, that this time of disorientation and deconstruction is actually the birthing space for a more just and generous world that will be made possible. Because what all of those letdowns, breakdowns, throwdowns, meltdowns, etc., reveal to us is that we were living in a world that was only functioning for a few. And now what we need, because of the level of diversity that is in our world, that has been in our world all along, but that our global technologies are now allowing us to kind of cross-pollinate at an unprecedented level in human history, what we're now able to, what we now must be able to accommodate is a cultural reality that honors the life and can promote a healthy life for a huge diversity of human beings and the planet in order to live in a sustainable way. So we are at the birthplace, I think, of creating a world that works for I hope all, but I certainly hope more people. So COVID becomes then, by my way of thinking, an accelerant to what was already happening, an accelerant to what was already true in the world. Now, here's what I think is kind of at stake that I want to highlight here. And I think that there's never been a more important moment for religious leadership than this moment, because in the words of Jean Houston, we as a humanity, we have developed the capacity to destroy ourselves without the wisdom to know not to do so. So there's something very real at stake. We can literally blow up our planet, and we've never been able to do that before as a humanity until we invented this atomic bomb. And now we are creating climate change dynamics that are untenable for life on this planet. So we're dealing with really significant life and death issues that are unprecedented in human history. One of the only ways of addressing that with any kind of sustainability, I think, any kind of staying power, is that we have to change the story that we're telling ourselves about what it means to be human, what relationship we have with one another, and what relationship we have with the earth. And particularly that kind of work happens at the archetypal level. It happens at the level of theology. So when we talk about this, or when we think about the sermons that we preach, or we think about the songs that we sing, or we think about the ways that we organize ourselves and in our current iterations in these buildings, in these neighborhoods, under these denominational banners, most often. When we think about all of those ways, we're telling a story built on a set of assumptions that explain who we are, where we've come from, and what the meaning of life is. But those explanations that have brought us to this point are now, is what I want to argue, insufficient to carry us forward. So we need a new story of what does it mean to be human, that is not based in a consumerist mindset, that doesn't have profit as its primary driving motive, that understands we're not creatures here to subdue the earth, to consume it for our own pleasure, but that we're here to live in compatible, kind, sustainable ways. And that happens at the theological level. We as wisdom bearers, as storytellers of a culture, have a particular job at this moment, I think, to reweave the imaginative fabric of our cultures. When we are able to successfully do that, then it changes everything else that's impacted by that goes up those blocks. So when we can develop a theological framework that rewards sustainability, that rewards collaboration, that honors the divine masculine and the divine feminine, that recognizes our connections to one another, our belonging to one another, our interdependence, then we end up creating systems based on a different set of values, a set of values that were driven from those stories that we're telling about ourselves. And so that changes our isms, the way in which we label each other, the way in which we relate to each other. And then when that changes, we change the way that we transact with each other, our economies, our politics, the ways that we structure our laws, our institutions. And when that happens, then we have an entirely different understanding of how we contribute into that and who we are in relationship to the other and to this wider story of human history. So there's a great deal at stake right now, because here's another thing that I think is happening is that at the story level, things are falling apart. They're a total hot mess, right? So this is what's being revealed, I think. What was being revealed is that patriarchy is an insufficient story for a sustainable future going forward. But it's the story we've told for thousands of years. And it's a story that has embraced an expression of toxic masculinity that by definition promotes violence as the go-to solution for maintaining power and for celebrated expression of of creating influence and of making a difference in the world. So we've created a story that justifies that, and we've used our sacred text to do so, and we have created songs and hymns that celebrate that, and we have national holidays that highlight our war heroes, and we have built that into the very fabric of our culture. Now, when that happens, then it is no surprise, is it, that white supremacy gets ingrained into the very DNA of our global understanding of what it means to be human, not just in the United States. And so we find that white supremacy becomes baked into the global infrastructure and institutions, because what we now need, if we're going to live in a patriarchal culture built on violence and power and toxic masculinity, is that we have to have some mechanisms for controlling people. And so we use race and religion in order to make that, in order to just be efficient in that game that we're playing. And then because we've got that kind of control, well, we're going to build a system that then benefits a certain class of people. And so we create capitalism, because my gosh, if you want to maintain a slave state, an us versus them, have and have not kind of culture, then capitalism really works very well. And so we create this framework of just, the most patriotic thing you can do is consume, consume, consume. And even if you are the poorest among the poor, your life goal is to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and extend yourself in credit, go into debt, and that way we can control you from here on out. We'll just charge you ridiculous sums of interest and make sure that you stay in your place, right? So capitalism is the byproduct then of the original story we've been telling ourselves for thousands of years now. And it is consuming our planet, and it is, I would argue, consuming our very souls. So then we get up to, well, how do we understand ourselves, our egos, our individual mindsets? And so we're placed by design into these competitive relationships. My company competes against your company. I'm here to Shark Tank you, like dominate the industry. I need to be better than you. I need to have someone lower than me in order for me to feel good about myself. So we other people. And we're rewarded for doing so. So there's a binary or a dualist mindset that gets set in us that is just tearing us apart. And it's tearing us apart so much because we're not designed that way. That is not the sacred design of how, at least I believe, that God dreamed us to be. I don't think that that's consistent with our sacred design, our sacred makeup. So here's what I hope is happening. Let's think through this together. But what I hope is happening is that we're actually living through a transition, a shift. And gratefully, there are a lot of people who are beginning to wake up to this. But here's what I think is going on, that at the archetypal story level, we're beginning to recognize and celebrate and embrace stories that weave a picture together, or weave a narrative together that is celebratory of our connection to one another, of our interdependence. And so we're able to now talk about the ways in which everyone belongs, the ways in which we are all, instead of black and white and brown, or Georgians or Tennesseans, or Bostonians, or Californians, or however we begin to divide ourselves. We are actually all earthlings, right? We're all part of a common human family that is dependent upon each other and upon our planet to be able to thrive in this life as we were created to thrive. And if that's the framework, if that's the story that we can all begin to really adopt in ourselves and get our heads around, then what that will shift for us is the framework of our values and beliefs. So if at the level of story we're telling an interdependence story, then that means that everything belongs and everyone belongs, that becomes our value set. of radical hospitality. And then, if that's our value set, then we must, by definition, begin to build economic policies and structures and political policies, structures that recognize that deeply relational web. And so we begin to build an eco-civilization, one that honors sustainability and sacred balance. And when we're able to embrace that within us, then what it opens up for us, what it allows for, is that we begin to tap more easily. I think more and more of us are into this space, but we're tapped more easily into a mature contemplative space where we recognize that we are not the ego that we think that we are as we're parading around on this planet, but that we're actually, every one of us, sacred expressions of the divine. And that we can work together and we can live together and we can commune together because I see the God in you and you see the God in me. And that there is a maturing in our psychology that allows us to see through what have been architected barriers, falsely put up barriers that we've used to divide ourselves in the past. So I hope that we're living in the midst of this kind of transition, though there are no guarantees that that is the case here. But I think that that's the essential work of the faith leader right now. So I want to ask, what do you see for the future? And don't let my Pollyanna-ish eyes cloud you. But what do you see? What do you uniquely see that the rest of us might miss? But it's clear to you. And in your willingness to articulate that, to say it out loud in whatever spaces you live and move and have your being matters right now, because I think that is, in fact, the art of discernment for the sake of the common good. So in the midst of all of this change, as we're living through at the 30,000 foot level, what I've just walked through, the question is, how are our ministries now being invited to change? And when we first went into lockdown, I put together some just observations, again, having studied the church for over 20 years at this point and across many denominations. I wanted to begin to articulate what are some of the trends that we knew we could count on. And so here are some of the ones that I want to just go over quickly. What will happen to our churches in these next few months, few years? What I want to start with is that online church is here to stay. So if your congregation has made an investment into that space, continue to do so. Online church is not a faded copy of in-person church, and it's not fake church, right? It's just not physical church. So online church is just as legitimate, just as valuable a way to gather, and for some people even more so than in person. So it's a different modality. It's just a different way of being church, but it is an increasingly essential one that we should be wise to continue to embrace. I also want to just ready us for the reality that church closures actually are accelerating, not just will accelerate. There are a number of congregations, hundreds of congregations across this country that simply will not be able to reopen. And we are, at this point, anticipating that at least for the next few months, those churches that are reopening can anticipate attendance being between 30 to 50% of what it used to be. Now, I want to go out on a limb here. I don't have any data. I'm not sure anybody does. But I want to go ahead and I'll say on the record, I think we'll look back at this pandemic as the time when the institutional church is finally going to collapse. I don't think church attendance will ever get back to what it was before this pandemic. I think too many of us have now repatterned our lives. And we're asking different questions that the institutional church is not necessarily designed to address, which is not to say that I think this is the end of our movement. I frankly am incredibly excited about what this will open up for us, but I want to be honest, if you're leading an institution right now and you start to see some of these trends, I don't want you to take that personally. I hope you'll normalize that and realize it's just a byproduct of the time in which we are living. You have not personally failed, nor does this demand you work yourself to death trying to push against this trend, and you lead to burning yourself out. Neither of those outcomes serve what I think God is up to right now. The next one is that our funding models need to be reimagined. Now, that was true way before this happened, but now it's pretty obvious that if we're going to continue to depend on giving from individual donors as our sole source of income, then it's going to change what we're able to offer, because that sole source of income for many churches, though not all, will decline over the coming years. And so let's be curious about that. Let's be playful about that. So we can't pay for the same kind of structures that we had before, but can I say those structures, I don't think they were working well on a lot of different levels. And so why don't we let them go? And then let's look at what resources we still do have left, which are tons, which are plentiful, and structure ourselves in a way that grant us the agility to move quickly and lightly, to live lightly on the earth, and that allow us to seek God through the tradition that has been true for ours this whole time, and that is that we are people of the way, right? We are people on the move. That has been the Christian calling. I think we're probably never meant to be put into buildings and handed hymnals and told to stand still and do the things that we do right or have done thus far. That has served the time that it served. And now I think we've got some new potentials in front of us that we could explore. So that leads to churches need a new staffing structure. At the very least, you probably need to invite, a digital. You need to have somebody or somebodies with competency in the digital space. But for a lot of our congregations, they were overstaffed and under-resourced already, and that this is really accelerated that, especially with the wearing off of the PPP loans that I think provided some artificial staying power for a lot of these congregations. So we're going to see a lot of reorganizing, restaffing. And again, I hope that you can, it'll be painful. There's no question it is painful, but I hope that you'll also recognize it was a long time coming before now. And it opens up some really exciting possibilities for us. This next one, the younger generations can finally contribute with more engaged leadership. For years I would hear the complaint from younger leaders of congregations that they couldn't afford to spend, 2 hours, 3 hours at a church for a council meeting or go to committee meetings or do all of the things that we were requiring of them to do because they had full-time jobs, they were raising young kids, there were lots of life demands that they had to attend to. But now that we can jump on a Zoom meeting and we've learned that we can do the business of church and we can actually continue to advance ministries and do really good work, they can be at home with their families. They can contribute to the thinking and the time and the resources needed to continue this work of being the body of Christ. And they can do it at a higher level with greater engagement because we're embracing the technologies that make that possible. So that's a win. That's a real win. So let's not start to going back and requiring these, show up in person for these long meetings. Probably you don't do that, those long meetings. That was just in my churches. And this last one, we will all church hop. Now, again, I want to say that was already happening, but not many of us were talking about it. But now with congregations putting their services online or doing a lot of online ministry, it means that I can tune into Middle Collegiate Church in New York to watch their service for a little while, and then I can jump over to Grace Cathedral out in California and watch their service for a little while, and then I can tune into I don't know, circular service in South Carolina, right? Or then I can bebop over to Adam Hamilton's church out in Kansas, and tune into his stuff too. So it allows all of us to now become engaged with and fed by a multitude of spaces that are doing really good theological work. And I think that's pretty exciting, but it has big implications for what our jobs become as what it is that we need to curate and produce in the world, and or not curate and produce in the world. And what I'd like to suggest here too is that it might very well be we could do less, produce less, perform less, and have a bigger impact, because now we have the capacity to share among a lot of different systems instead of us thinking we have to do it all by ourselves. Now, I don't think we've got that mindset in place yet, but I hope it is coming. And the final slide, I want to just highlight that, again, one of the exciting things I think we're seeing is that we are now creating new liturgies, prayers, and songs that will carry us forward, that reflect this transitional time in human history, that honor the progressive values that we see emerging in more and more places. That's fantastic, because every movement needs songs to sing and needs poetry and art and sculpture and paintings and dances and expression that help to provoke that story, help to draw it out of us and into us in ways that fundamentally change our behavior, that change our worldview. So that doesn't come from really well-preached sermons. That comes from incarnational practices, singing, dancing, bowing, meditating, experiencing awe when we look at pieces of art. These are all embodied experiences that transform us in deep and powerful ways. So I'm excited to see a lot of that being developed right now. We will renew our investment in local communities. I think now we all recognize how important it is that we have thriving local communities where we have local economies that support small business, that support our neighbors, and that are looking out for the quality of life to be on the rise with people who are living within them. So I could imagine then that the primary work of the church going forward is to figure out what are the indicators in our space that are dragging down that quality of life. What is harming people? And then the church goes to work to relentlessly try to address those issues. So what that would result in is that ultimately, the day I dream is that wherever there is a UCC congregation or a UMC congregation or a Presbyterian congregation or a disciples congregation, that we can guarantee that the quality of life for the people living in those spaces is on the rise. Like, imagine if we could count on that graduation rates would be on the rise, that debt to income ratios would be more in balance, that the have and the have-nots, the differentiation between those would be leveling out, that healthcare would be actively protected and provided to people living in communities. And that was the work of the church, that's what we were up to. And that we were relentlessly focused on it, such that we could guarantee when we had a congregation in a community that we could count on those infrastructure pieces being strengthened and being protected because that community is there. I mean, I think that would be spectacular. That's what I hope and pray we can find ourselves to be about. And I know a lot of congregations already are, so I give thanks for that. This next one, we're going to continue to see a rise in spiritual directors and pastoral counselors who work outside of traditional congregational settings. In some ways, the church has been sort of set free from buildings, but our professional pastoral staff have as well in a lot of ways. Increasingly, I'm watching companies who have recognized that their staff, their employees, are more than just cogs and wheels that lead to production output, but are also full human beings and will continue to work in their spaces if that company recognizes the wholeness of their humanity. And so a lot of companies at this point are reaching out to religious leaders, interestingly, to begin to work with their employees, to provide support and to provide small group experience and all kinds of different expressions. I find that incredibly hopeful about the kind of world that we're beginning to create, because it's removing some of the divisions that have found their external expression in our systems, but have been internalized within us, so that we can only be spiritual beings on a Sunday or on a Saturday if we're Jewish, or Friday, but we can't be spiritual beings Monday through Friday in our corporate spaces. Well, that line is in complicated ways, but it's beginning to blur, and we will need to have a sophistication about how we engage those spaces, but I am hopeful about what that's opening up for us. And then finally, I want to say that we will create new partnerships, unusual partnerships, I think, but that will be necessary, because almost all of our systems are declining now to a point where not one of them can really make a difference at any kind of global scale if we don't partner. And so it's forcing us into partnerships that should have been there all along, but forcing those partnerships, because when we get committed to something, we won't be able to go it alone. And I frankly find that incredibly encouraging. So I think there's so much that's happening right now that we can find hope in, that what is being unveiled to us is systems that were causing harm and that needed to be torn apart and broken down. And they're awakening us to the ways in which we could live in a more just and generous world that works better for the common good. And we as faith leaders sit at the nexus of trying to make that happen as the wisdom bearers of our communities, as people who know how to tell ancient stories that inspire new visions. And we know how to look for the prophets and hold up the word of hope that helps people lead into the kind of transformation that we seek. So I want to ask you to keep your eyes out for some of these visionary leaders, but realize that it's not going to be some celebrity faith leader that's going to save the day. It's going to be you and the people in your life, and it's going to be me, and it's going to be every wonderful person that we can help see that they have agency and that they too can change this world. I want to close just with this one final image here. It's by the same artist that I talked about earlier. But this piece of art was created where when she took a solid black piece of fabric and she actually took out strings, threads to create this particular picture. It struck me because in a lot of ways what feels like is happening in our relational fabric, our communal fabric right now, is that things are being torn apart, they're being taken out. But what it could very well be is that it's actually revealing a more beautiful world, a more perfect picture, something that we couldn't have seen before because there was just too much there that was clouding our vision. But with the removal of these threads, all of a sudden a beautiful piece emerges. I really believe that's what's happening. I am staking my best life energy on that possibility and that reality, because I think that I think we have every reason to be hopeful, because I think God is with us and our best days are ahead. So thank you.
So we now have about 20 minutes in order to have conversation in response to what Reverend Trimble offered. The first question I want to pose, we don't have to stay here. We can go wherever your responses take us. But the first question I want to pose is that question that she offered about halfway through. What is it that you are imagining in the spaces that you are in? Are you imagining? And what is that? What is the vision for what you hope the church is becoming or can become? Oh, and I have to give y'all permission to unmute yourselves again. Sorry about that. So you should have permission to be able to unmute yourself and respond.
Well, as a very small church that was struggling before the COVID and still struggling, I actually think the people that we reached the most were online. And it's made me question whether we even need a building to proselytize, because at this point, with an older congregation, it's hard to take care of. And we are kind of strewn all over. The newer members are everywhere.
We may find that we can use our buildings differently. I mean, why is it just one church, one particular church using one building? And I'm sure there's cases where there are buildings that are being shared. Why not share that big sanctuary that sits empty all week with another denomination, another church,
We are a newish church, 15 years, that made a commitment from the beginning for environmental reasons, never to have our own building. But we have now a partnership with an Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. We use their space. We teach courses for them in return, but they also have a good hybrid setup, which allows us to have in-person services and stream them over Zoom at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And we actually have many churches here in the Southeast Conference that share. Shelley Poe has shared that Safe Harbor in Mississippi shares. I know right at the beginning of 2020, Community in Birmingham made the decision that they didn't need their building anymore, and they and Pilgrim UCC share a building in Birmingham.
Heather, I think that was Covenant and Pilgrim.
Yes, it was. I said Community, didn't I? Sorry, Covenant and Pilgrim. Thank you, Dorinda.
I'd love to hear how that goes. I'm part of Peace Congregational Church in Clemson. Pam Mack, my colleague, spoke a minute ago about that we are in an Osher Lifelong Learning Institute as a partner. And I know that their use of the building is weekday primarily, and our use of the building is Sunday afternoon. I'd love to know how two UCC congregations share a building.
Yeah, Jody. That's so the two congregations are the congregations that J.R. Finney is pastor of, and Paul Eknes Tucker. I think they worship at two different times. I'm not sure who's first in the day. I think it might be Pilgrim and then Covenant a little later in the day. Yeah. So there are ways to figure it out.
I believe that there will always be a need for physical congregating for church members. There's something about the Spirit moving amongst us that does not happen online, for me at least.
But this sharing is not just limited to our traditional understanding of congregations and meeting for worships. I mean, going to the thing that was most exciting to me about what Reverend Trimble was talking about was that sense of the church being a place that that enriches and empowers the community around it. So that makes it the church's business to be taking care of children and taking care of people who are sick and taking care of lower income, which is what the church has always done. But it just shifts that from saying you come to us and we do these things for you to saying we are making that investment in the community. And not that that's new either. That's the reason why historically, you know, the congregational churches were the community centers of their towns, and churches don't pay taxes because it was understood that that was an investment in the community that churches were making that was giving benefits to everybody. So, but to sort of reclaim and re-envision that, to me, is very exciting.
Well, and I think the flip side of that too is that, I mean, I think we have to realize that we aren't all going to do everything really well. And so, you know, congregations, there are things that individual congregations will do really well, but not every congregation is going to be able to do everything really well. And so there may be some congregations that do end up being primarily online, and there may be others that just meet in person. And those may not have the same sort of folks, you know, and there may be churches that have really great children's programs, and then there may be ones that don't. And so I think we have to think about what is it that we do and have the capacity to do really well and do that well and not disperse our energy quite as much trying to do things that we don't have that for, and that maybe another church in town, you know, it's part of we get into this whole competitive church thing. And so we think, oh, well, we all have to be able to compete with everybody else, so we got to do everything else. But if we have more collaborative relationships, then, you know, I send folks to other churches from time to time because I'm like, you know what, you're going to be happier there because they do this particular thing well and we don't.
Helene Loper, I think Helene had her hand up. Do you want to say something?
Yeah. First, I want to apologize for the background noise. It's hard to have the Zoom on when they're having a conversation in the kitchen. But I think one of the other things, particularly with the Zoom and some of the adaptations, many of the mega churches were using the small group concept that actually throws back to the very early church. That the whole question of you know, traveling to a central location, you know, we start talking about the you know, transportation issues, the logic of all the transportation used to get to the local place. But the early church, they met in smaller groups daily for sharing of you know, time together. The mega church structure in the small groups, and really that's the piece of the social function of our, not just as building blocks for the larger community, but as a place for the spiritual development of us as individuals. And we're saying to rethink that in terms of recognizing our interconnectedness, because what we've done is we built church walls as a way of having our own identity. You know, and everybody who went to this building had this identity. But to see beyond that, to see how we're connected in the spiritual journey through our gathering together with others and inclusion of others, you know, as she said, we won't all be attending from the same, you know, people will move, but, you know, people from one other denomination may want part of one of our smaller groups because it's, you know, it's there and they can with it. But it doesn't mean that they're not a part of their own congregation, but that we have walled into only ourselves, but we build connections with community in our spiritual development as well.
Thank
Part of
you,
my
Helene.
question is that when we are online, I feel that we, participate well in our services, but our church is built on mission. And long distance mission doesn't work too well. There's just a few that do the work continually. We don't seem to get the workers, the worshipers, yes, not the workers.
We have a couple of people who have their hands up, and I'd like to be able to get them to speak. J. Mason Davis.
Thank you. It just occurred. It has occurred to me through our experience through the pandemic, and it's kind of affirmed by what the speaker was talking about, is that our idea of congregation, I think, is going to change, or is in the process of changing. And I think that a broader community is what we have an opportunity of establishing going forward. Our church, we have prospered well during this period. Thank God to say. We have people that are now attending church that didn't attend church at all, and for various reasons. And the overall opinion is that we continue with this type of worship, even though there is a desire to open our church up for service. We still haven't even begun to discuss how we would go about doing that. And I don't know how it's going to happen. I'm sure it will happen, but it'll be something different than what it was before.
Chris.
Hey there, it's good to see y'all. I just wanted to follow up on Valerie's comments and note that there is a historical precedent for this kind of move. If we go back to the origins of Christianity, we see how much they're inflected by a crisis in Judaism, and specifically the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. There was an early understanding of what it is for the community of believers to come together that was kind of predicated on the notion of, well, there's a holy of holies and we're going to make sacrifices and we're going to have different tiers of people that can get closer to God depending upon how they act, and we could even say what they believe. I grew up in a fundamentalist church that was very similar, and so I think what we're seeing here is the chance to invert the way that we think about the relationship between practice and belief, to where church isn't the place where you come in, prove that you meet a bar of belief, and then thereby become worthy of assistance from the congregation, but rather, instead of measuring your belief and then compensating you with service, we instead express ourselves through service. And from that expression of service, we are then able to come to an understanding of what we truly believe. And moreover, I would suggest that as a consequence of this, new avenues of interfaith relations and collaboration will open, because what we see, I think, when we look at different religious communities is not only that, yeah, we have a lot of similar beliefs in certain ways. There's certainly very different and distinct things as well, but the way practice, the way charity, the way caring for each other in community look are almost identical in most circumstances, and we also have a lot to learn from each other. And so for me, that's an exciting thing, because what I'm seeing is you can look at the whole and say, well, what's missing? Or you can look at the whole and say, well, that's a new way through, and maybe some room for us to breathe as well. So I appreciate y'all tolerating my comments, and it's very good to be here with you.
I want to tie together what Chris said and what Jennifer said. The idea that no individual congregation can meet everybody's need. And then Chris is saying that we need to collaborate. Well, Jennifer said that too. And it's always been my belief that just as individuals have a call, individual congregations have a call too. It might not be for my congregation to have a food pantry. That might be your congregation's something that you really feel moved to do, but maybe my congregation does well with a health fair. And if we can all work together like that and identify our congregation's call, especially if we're a small church, what is your congregation's call? And that way, churches' collaboration means that, okay, as Jennifer said, I'm going to send you to that church because that church meets your need right now. And some other church will send somebody to my church. And because the important thing is making sure that people have their needs met. And if we keep that in mind, I think that will help to keep our churches alive.
Marvin Morgan, did you have something to say?
Yeah, yes, very briefly. Again, to say amen to what Chris has expressed. What made me a little bit late this morning was that my home congregation in Atlanta recently had an issues forum on efforts to steal the vote. The church where I'm serving as an interim pastor in Virginia, a week earlier had an issues forum on race and the criminal justice system. When I saw, having attended both, how helpful they were, we have now exchanged videos, and the local church here in Atlanta is distributing that video on race and the criminal justice system. And we have the video of the seminar that was held in Atlanta. It's just a wonderful way of doubling the impact of the wonderful messages that are there in those two things. And if truly we could do that among 10 churches, 20 churches, because we have just that much in common. I happen to be in a setting where there are only 5 Black members, but it is one of the most progressive congregations I've ever served in 50 years of ministry. And Sojourners UCC, some of you might have heard of that congregation. It keeps me on my toes because they are dealing with issues all the time. Thank you.
Well, our time is coming to a close. I think we have time for one last comment before we have to wrap up so that y'all can get to the next workshop that you've signed up for.
I wish there was more time to hear people's ideas for what are the new archetypal stories to focus on.
How will we be able to see this video again? You said it's been recorded.
It's been recorded. Early next week, we'll be posting all of those to a website very similar to the one that you went to go get your links. And we will send it out to the same group that received the emails to be able to get that you should have been getting all week. We do know Gmail caused havoc this week for a lot of folks in not receiving our emails. But we will be sending it out. It will be something very similar to sec.org/ probably recordings. And they'll just be all links to YouTube videos right there for you to be able to access.
Thank you.
I think that would be great for those of us that we're kind of together, but we're not open officially. But I think this would be an opportunity to get the feedback from our Congress, our fellow members, to come up with more ideas. I've gotten a bunch, but I think if they could see it, they might get their own ideas.
Heather, are these recordings going to be on the SEC YouTube channel?
They are, but they're going to be ones that you have to have the link to get to. They're going to be unpublic, private. Okay. Unlisted, that's what they call them. They're going to be unlisted for the first 6 months. We might list them after 6 months, but as registrants, you get access to the videos.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining us this morning for this workshop.